The sun had barely risen over the quiet countryside of Vermont when Ava Dawson pulled into the tiny train station in Maple Glen, her dusty red truck coughing in protest. She rubbed her eyes, still groggy from her early shift at the bakery, and scanned the empty platform. Frost clung to the edges of the wooden benches, and the scent of fresh pine hung in the air. It would have been peaceful if she weren't doing a favor for her aunt. Again. Aunt Melody had begged her last night to pick up a guest arriving from the city. Just a quiet man who's renting the old cottage for a few weeks. Wants a local to show him around, she'd said. Ava hadn't been thrilled, but her aunt had offered to cover 2 weeks of flour orders for the bakery, and that was hard to pass up. She blew on her hands, waiting by the bench, clutching a piece of cardboard with the name Ethan scrawled across it. A sleek black suitcase appeared first, followed by a man in a long, dark coat and well-worn hiking boots. His hair was tousled like he'd slept on the train, and a faint stubble shadowed his jaw. Despite his urban clothes, he looked oddly at ease stepping onto the gravel path. "You must be Ava," he said, voice low but clear. He offered a half-smile and stuck out a gloved hand. "That depends," she said, eyeing him. "You Ethan?" "Yeah. Ethan Ward." His smile widened. "Sorry I'm late. The train got delayed up north." Ava nodded slowly, not shaking his hand. "Let's just get moving. I've got bread to bake, and you've got nature to look at." He chuckled, unfazed, and followed her to the truck, dragging his suitcase behind him. Straight to the point. "I like that." She threw him a look. Tourists usually say that right before complaining about the cold or asking for Wi-Fi. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, brushing dust off his coat. "Well, I'm not like most tourists," she snorted as she started the engine. "We'll see." As they drove through the winding mountain roads, Ethan asked polite questions about the town's history, the trees lining the road, and the barn murals painted decades ago. Ava gave short, factual answers, her tone clipped. She didn't have time for chatty outsiders, especially ones with city shoes pretending to be rustic. But Ethan wasn't faking enthusiasm. He stared out the window like the mountains were stories, and he kept glancing at her, amused by her sarcasm rather than offended by it. "You really don't like people, huh?" he asked casually, after she pointed out the town's 1 gas station and 3 antique shops. "I like people just fine," she said, hands tight on the wheel. "I just don't like babysitting bored city men looking for postcard charm." Ethan grinned, leaning back. "Maybe I'm here looking for something else." She shot him a look but said nothing. He was a guest. Temporary. She'd do the job and move on. But deep down, something in his eyes made her uneasy. Like he wasn't just another passing visitor, like he was hiding something. And Ava Dawson had no room in her life for mysteries. The cottage stood alone on the edge of a frozen lake, its wooden frame softened by years of snowfall and ivy growth. Ava unlocked the door with a grunt, pushing it open to reveal a cozy interior, stone fireplace, plaid curtains, and a stack of firewood by the hearth. Her aunt kept the place spotless for seasonal renters. "This is it," Ava said, stepping aside as Ethan rolled his suitcase across the threshold. "No room service, no minibar, just snow, trees, and the occasional moose." Ethan chuckled, stepping inside and soaking in the quiet charm. "It's perfect." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to ask about the Wi-Fi password?" He shrugged off his coat. "Not here for the internet. I'm here for stillness." That answer, sincere and unexpected, caught her off guard. She watched as he gently touched the mantel, eyes scanning the shelf lined with old black and white photos. Her aunt's grandparents, past winters, and weddings long faded. "You look like someone trying to remember something they lost," Ava said before she could stop herself. Ethan turned toward her, a small, unreadable smile on his lips. "Maybe I am." The silence between them was thick for a moment. She cleared her throat. "I'll give you a few minutes to settle in. I'll swing by tomorrow at 9 to show you the trail loop." "Sounds good," he said. "Hey, thanks for the ride." She paused in the doorway. "Just doing my part for the town. Don't read into it." "I won't," he replied. But something in his gaze told her he already had. The next morning, Ava found him waiting on the porch, already dressed in layers and boots, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. She was surprised. Not many tourists handled the Vermont cold without complaint. She motioned for him to follow, leading him down the forest trail where tall pines cast long shadows on the snow. As they walked, he didn't pepper her with idle questions like others. Instead, his inquiries were pointed, precise. How old's the sawmill by the creek? Who designed that chapel by the bakery? How many generations live here and never leave? She stopped mid-step. Why do you care about old wood and small-town legends? He gave her a half-smile. Because places tell stories, and I'm trying to listen. Ava didn't respond, but something in her chest twisted at those words. Because that's exactly why she'd stayed in Maple Glen. Not for money, not for comfort, but for meaning, for the stories. They reached the overlook near the frozen falls, where white ice cascaded down rock like draped velvet. Ethan looked out at the scene, hands in his coat pockets, and said quietly, "You ever think about leaving?" Ava scoffed. "Every time the bakery's oven breaks down." "But I never do." "This place, it's complicated. And it's mine." Ethan nodded like he understood that more than he should. As the wind picked up, Ava noticed his coat. It looked worn but expensive. The stitching, the subtle logo on the inside collar. "Where'd you say you're from again?" she asked, eyes narrowing. He hesitated, gaze still on the frozen falls. "Boston, originally." She didn't press, but the seed was planted. Ethan Ward might be hiding more than just a quiet soul looking for peace. And, for the first time, Ava wasn't just curious, she was wary. The snow had started falling again by the time Ava dropped Ethan off at the cottage that afternoon. Flakes danced in the wind like bits of ash, landing gently on the truck's windshield as she turned to him. "I'll be back tomorrow if you still want the lake trail," she said, keeping her voice neutral. Ethan nodded, pulling his scarf tighter. Looking forward to it. He hesitated before stepping out. "You know, Ava, I appreciate you showing me around. I know it's not exactly part of your job description." "I didn't say I liked it," she muttered, but her eyes didn't match her words. He grinned as he closed the door and disappeared into the snow-dusted walkway. That evening, Ava sat cross-legged on her couch, sipping tea and half watching a rerun of an old cooking show. But her thoughts were miles away, still on the trail, still on that moment when Ethan had asked her about leaving town. Something about his tone. Like he wasn't just curious, like he knew. She reached for her laptop on impulse. The name Ethan Ward was still fresh in her mind, and after a moment of hesitation, she typed it into the search bar. Nothing suspicious came up, at first, but then, buried under pages of generic LinkedIn profiles and articles about fishing guides, she found a press release. Just a few years old. Investor Ethan C. Ward closes $15 million redevelopment deal in Boston's Back Bay. The elusive CEO behind Merrifield Holdings rarely appears in public. Her pulse quickened. Another article, mysterious real estate magnate Ethan Ward lists historic mansion for private sale. No comment from reps. There was no photo. But the timing lined up. The name matched. And if this was the same Ethan, then he wasn't just some city guy renting a cabin for fresh air. He was wealthy, powerful, and hiding something. Ava slammed the laptop shut and sat back, staring at the ceiling. Her gut clenched, part confusion, part something else. Why lie? Why Maple Glen? And why pretend to be someone else? The next day, she arrived at the cottage 10 minutes late, on purpose. She wanted to see if he'd react. Ethan opened the door without surprise, dressed in his usual rugged but clean style, coffee in hand, calm. "I figured you'd changed your mind," he said. "Thought about it," she replied coolly, "but I hate unfinished business." The walk to the lake was quiet at first. Snow muffled the sounds around them, and Ava's boots crunched over the packed path. Ethan didn't speak until they reached the edge, where the frozen water stretched wide like a sheet of glass. "You seem different today," he said. "Do I?" she asked, arms folded. "Maybe I just don't like secrets." He turned to face her, the wind tugging at the edges of his coat. "Ava, why are you really here?" she cut in. "You're not just some guy looking to birdwatch in the woods. I found the articles, Ethan, the company, the mansion. You're not a stranger to the spotlight. He let out a slow breath, eyes narrowing. Not in anger, but in reluctant acceptance. I didn't lie, he said quietly. I just didn't tell you everything. I used to live in that world. Suits, contracts, boardrooms. I burned out, lost sight of everything real. And you came here to what? Reset. Ava's voice was sharp. You think hiding in a rental and asking deep questions makes you honest? No, he said. But I didn't want you to see the bank account first. I wanted to see what happened when someone didn't know. The sincerity in his voice struck her off guard. She looked away, jaw tight. People like you don't stay, she said. You get what you came for. Peace, a story, and then you vanish, and people like me get left behind. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. You don't know that. I know what I want. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching, and for a moment, Ava didn't know whether to run or believe him. That evening, the snow fell heavier than it had in weeks. The power flickered once, then died with a final hum, plunging Ava's bakery apartment into shadows. She sighed, grabbed her flashlight, and instinctively reached for her coat. She should have stayed put, curled up in blankets, waiting it out. But her legs carried her to the truck, tires crunching over fresh snow as she turned toward the lake. The truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had said. I know what I want. And the way he had looked at her, like he saw more than just a small-town girl with a clipboard and a wall around her heart. When she arrived, the cottage was glowing faintly. A fire crackled inside. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. You okay? He asked, stepping back to let her in. I figured the storm would hit hard. Lost power, she muttered, brushing snow from her hair. Figured yours would too. He nodded toward the fireplace. Still hanging on. I've got blankets and tea if you're cold. I'm fine, she said too quickly, but her fingertips tingled from the cold and from something else she couldn't name. She sat down across from the fire, the room lit in amber and shadow. The silence stretched between them, not tense, just full. Finally, Ethan broke it. You were right, he said softly. About me not being honest. Ava looked over, waiting. I didn't come here just to escape the noise. I came because I didn't know who I was anymore. I built a life that looked good on paper but felt empty. I was always the guy people smiled at until they saw the balance sheet. Then they smiled wider. Ava stared into the flames, her voice a whisper. That's still more than most people get. Maybe, he said, but none of it felt real. Not until here. Not until you. Her breath caught, her gaze snapping to his. I know what it looks like, he said. Some rich guy slumming it for a change of pace. But that's not what this is. That's not what you are. You don't know me, she said quietly. You've seen me bake bread, point out trees, yell at tourists. That's it. I've seen more than that, Ethan said, his voice low. I've seen how you carry this whole town in your voice, how you light up when you talk about history, how you pretend not to care but do, so much it scares you. Ava stood abruptly, arms crossed, fighting the tremble in her chest. Don't say things like that. You don't get to see me like that. You don't know what I've lost. Ethan stood too, but didn't step closer. Then tell me. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Her jaw clenched. The words were stuck. My mom died when I was 19, she finally said, voice flat. Dad checked out 2 years later. Not physically, just stopped being in the room. I took over the bakery, paid the mortgage, smiled through it. People call me steady, reliable. She looked at him then, raw and defiant. But no one ever stayed. Not once, and I stopped expecting them to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Ethan's eyes shone in the firelight, softer than she'd ever seen them. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight, he said, but I'm here, and I'm not walking away. She stared at him. This man who had everything, but looked like he'd been starving for something only she could give. Ava stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. And when their fingers brushed, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet truce. 2 days passed. The snow melted slightly under a rare midwinter sun, and Maple Glen breathed again, icicles dripping from rooflines, smoke curling from chimneys. At the bakery, Ava rolled out croissant dough as usual, but her thoughts were miles away. Ethan hadn't said the words, "I love you," but his silence had spoken volumes. He'd stayed, listened, waited. She hadn't let him kiss her, not yet, but something inside her had cracked open beside that firelight. For the first time in years, she wanted to be seen again. Around noon, a black SUV with city plates rolled into the parking lot behind the bakery. Ava glanced up from the counter, frowning. Tourists didn't usually drive Escalades up dirt lanes in February. The bell above the front door jingled. A woman walked in, tall, striking, hair pulled into a sharp bun, sunglasses still perched on her head like she owned the room. Her coat alone probably cost more than Ava's truck. "Hi," the woman said, her voice brisk. "I'm looking for Ethan Ward." Ava blinked. "He's not here." The woman's lips curved, too tight to be a smile. "I figured. You're Ava Dawson, right?" "Yes, I'm Vanessa Cole, Ethan's business partner. Or, I was." A chill swept through Ava that had nothing to do with the wind. Vanessa stepped closer, eyes scanning the bakery. "I assumed he was just taking a mental health break." But then, he stopped answering calls. Ignored meetings. "Board members are panicking." Ava kept her voice even. "Maybe that's what he needs." Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Oh, I'm sure. But he's not built for snow and small-town romance. He gets restless. He forgets." Ava gripped the countertop. "You came all this way to remind him?" "I came," Vanessa said, "to take him back." That evening, Ava stood outside the cottage, heart pounding as the wind howled across the lake. She didn't knock, just waited. Ethan opened the door and smiled, until he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Vanessa's in town." He blinked. What?" "She came to the bakery. Said you've been ignoring the board. That they're worried. That she wants to take you back." Ethan's expression hardened, a flush creeping into his cheeks. "Of course she did." "So it's true?" "I left that world, Ava." "Did you, though? Or were you just hiding?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. She stepped back, her voice rising. "Do you know what it felt like, watching her walk in like she still owned part of you? She doesn't. Not anymore. But she knew about me, knew my name, knew exactly where to find you." Ava's voice cracked. "How much of this was real, Ethan? And how much was just your escape?" Ethan stepped forward, but Ava shook her head. "Don't. Not unless you're ready to be honest with me. Completely." The wind whipped between them, scattering snow across the porch. Finally, Ethan spoke, low, steady. "I walked away from everything, Ava. I didn't even tell my lawyers. I transferred the company to a trust and came here with one bag. I didn't want to run the world anymore. I wanted to breathe. And her? She came here for control, not for me. You think she cares where I sleep or what makes me happy?" "I don't care what she thinks, Ethan," Ava whispered. "I care whether you're the man who sat beside me by the fire or the one who lets her speak for you." Silence. Then Ethan said, "Come with me." She hesitated, but followed. He led her inside to a side room she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a desk, bare except for a journal, a small framed photo of an old Vermont barn, and a signed transfer letter from his company dated a month ago. "I'm not going back," he said, voice raw. "I already chose. The question is, do you believe me?" Ava stared at the transfer letter. The signature was unmistakable. Ethan C. Ward. Dated. Notarized. Witnessed. She traced the edge of the frame beside it. The weathered barn in the photo looked like the one near the orchard trail, half collapsing, but still standing. "That was my grandfather's," Ethan said, his voice low behind her. "The first place I ever felt grounded. I visited it every summer until I was 15. Before the deals, before the money." She turned to look at him. "Why'd you keep it?" she asked. "Because it reminded me of who I was, who I could be again." He stepped forward slowly, not to convince her, but to let her decide. "I didn't come here to fool you, Ava. I came here to find what I'd lost. And then I met you. And suddenly I wasn't just trying to remember, I was trying to rebuild." Ava's chest ached. The words felt real. But real was the scariest thing of all. "Vanessa said you forget things," she said softly, "that you get restless." "I don't forget people who matter," he replied. "I don't forget moments like that night by the fire, or the way you walk faster when you're nervous, or how you braid your hair when you're frustrated." Her breath caught. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he added. "But I'll never lie again, not to you." Ava turned back toward the letter, toward the proof, not of his wealth, but of his surrender. And yet, the weight inside her wasn't about money or secrets anymore. Shucks, it was about her own fear. "You want to stay," she said. "But what if I don't know how to let you?" Ethan came closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Then let's figure it out," he said, his voice gentle. "Together, at your pace." Her heart pounded, her mind a storm. She thought of every goodbye she'd endured, every time she'd been left behind. And yet, she also thought of his hands wrapping her knee after the fall, his voice when he called her real, his laughter in the bakery, his quiet in the firelight. Ava reached for the photo frame, her fingers steady now. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said. She looked up at him, truly looked, and nodded once, slowly. "But I don't want to run anymore." Ethan's smile broke, quiet, raw, like relief and wonder, all in one. And then she stepped into his arms, not as a gesture of surrender, but as a choice. Spring came slowly to Maple Glen. Snow turned to rain, and rain coaxed the green from the soil like a secret long buried. Tulips peeked through beside the bakery. The lake, once sealed in silence, now shimmered with light. Ava's hands were no longer just flour-dusted. They were ink-marked, too, flipping through sketches of an idea she'd only ever whispered to herself. A heritage cafe and storytelling space. Stories Needed, she'd called it, half joking, until Ethan had looked at her like she'd just described the North Star. And now, months later, the sign hung proudly over the old farmer's market building he'd quietly bought under her name. She still didn't like that part. Ownership made her bristle, but Ethan had learned when to step back and let her steer. It was her dream. He was just the scaffolding beneath it. They didn't have a wedding, at least not one with dresses or guest lists. One morning in June, Ethan brewed coffee, Ava braided her hair, and they exchanged rings on the dock as loons cried across the lake. Mia, Ava's childhood friend, played the violin. The mayor brought cinnamon rolls, and the justice of the peace wore flannel. Ethan's vow was simple. "I won't fix you, Ava. I'll just stand with you while you build." Ava's vow was simpler. "Don't leave, not even when I try to push you away." He didn't. Not when the town gossips raised eyebrows. Not when his old world tried to reel him back with press offers and legacy deals. Not even when Ava panicked at the idea of having something too good to be true. A year later, Ava stood behind the counter of Stories Needed, flour on her cheek and a small chalkboard in her hand. Today's prompt: tell us a moment that changed your life. Kids sprawled on the rug near the reading nook. Locals gathered by the window, sipping maple coffee and swapping stories like currency. At the far table, Ethan taught a visiting teen how to fix a squeaky door hinge using a napkin and an old pocket knife. He looked up and smiled at Ava, that same quiet smile she'd first ignored at the train station. She smiled back, touched her silver ring, and exhaled. She wasn't waiting to be left anymore. She wasn't afraid of his past, or hers. She had chosen this life, this man, this place, this dream. And every morning, she chose it again. Amazel. Months later, while cleaning out an old drawer, Ava found Ethan's travel journal. She hadn't read it before. On the last page, in familiar handwriting, was a single line. Maple Glen didn't just remind me who I was. Ava reminded me who I wanted to become. She closed the journal, heart full. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone's chapter. Number May, she felt like the beginning of something real. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.